Today is Wednesday, June 12th, and what is going on in the world now? I'm hearing a lot of different things going on. I've been hearing a lot about this ceasefire deal between Gaza, between Hamas and Israel. Um, Stuff about Israel dropping white phosphorus on Lebanon, and Russia moving ships into and missiles into Cuba. It seems like a lot's going on, but at the same time, I often sometimes wonder what is really true because I'm not hearing a lot of chatter about this from the mainstream media, and it's hard to find. Like, this seems like a big deal if missiles and ships are going into Cuba. Like, we had the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, and then same thing with the ceasefire deal. We've been talking about ceasefires forever, and there is something supposed to be signed. I don't know where to start. Where would you like to begin?
Start first with the Cuba. I don't have a whole lot to say about it.
Okay.
Let's get it
Can
out
you
of the
move
way.
the mic up a little bit more? You're a little quiet.
Oh yeah, sure.
There
How's
you
that?
go. Yeah, that's
Okay.
better.
Um, there was the Russians sent a small flotilla. I think a small number of ships and a submarine to Cuba. They're not actually delivering weapons or missiles to Cuba. That would be a replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? But some of these ships, I think at least one of the ships, a frigate and the submarine, are equipped with hypersonic missiles, and are capable of delivering nuclear warheads. Now, some people see that as a deliberate attempt to, just to send a kind of a shot across the American bow, just a warning shot, right? Don't mess with us. But I've also heard that actually this trip was planned several months ago. That is nothing, out of the ordinary. So yeah, there has been some sort of chatter about it. It's received some play, in U.S. news. I've been seeing headlines about it, and my understanding now is actually that the U.S. Navy is searching for the submarine. They don't know where it is. Um, just to comment on the Russian Navy, the Russian Navy in general is pretty small now. It doesn't amount to much. A lot of the vessels are aging. Their aircraft carrier is supposed to be kind of a joke. But their submarine fleet is excellent, and I think equals or surpasses the American submarine fleet. And I think actually in this day and age, if you're going to invest limited resources in a navy, it should be going into submarines. I mean, they still have a real purpose. They can hide, and they can deliver these missiles, from basically anywhere on the globe where there's sufficient depth of water. And then, as we've been saying earlier, it's just maybe the whole, the heyday of of naval power has passed. It's just that there's been a shift in the balance of power, in the technological balance of power. These drones, including water drones, which are cheap, can do tremendous damage and can sink these multi-million or even multi-billion-dollar naval vessels. But
Can you move the string over your mic? It seems like it's pulling the mic down away from your face slowly over time.
I
Yeah.
see. That's what's
So
going
you're
on
starting to
here.
get quieter over time.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Much better.
There we go. Okay. So anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say about that incident. I don't think there's a whole lot to it. And
So nothing to be alarmed about. It's not
no,
like
I
okay.
don't.
I
Right.
kind of use you as my radar when I start to panic. It's because you
Right.
hear these headlines and they try to make it seem like it's a big deal. There's a lot of
Yeah.
clickbait out there. So I was like, oh, is this Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0? So it seems
Yeah.
like not much of anything then. Just a
No, I
little
don't think there's much.
escalation. Okay, just
Yeah. I guess it's just a reminder of a fact, though, that the Russians do have these missiles that we can't defend against, and they can deliver them from submarines that we have difficulty tracking. So, I mean, I think that's a healthy reminder. Maybe that's why this trip was planned in the first place. Even if the planning was done several months ago.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear at least that this isn't the Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0 then.
Right.
What can you maybe break down the ceasefire deal that I've been hearing so much about? So I first heard it about 2 weeks ago, or maybe even more. Biden proposed this three-part ceasefire deal, which would include the exchange of all the hostages, and then and with a reconstruction of Gaza, and the end of all hostilities. And it was saying that this was an Israeli proposal, but then I'm hearing that it wasn't an Israeli proposal; that it's something that's just being made up by the U.S. State Department.
Right.
Can you talk about
Yeah,
that a
well,
bit?
I've heard the same thing that, yeah, again, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. administration presented it as an Israeli proposal, but the Israelis themselves deny it. And I think in the end, actually, the Israelis are not going to support. There's just no way. It contradicts their firm stance on Gaza ever since the beginning of, ever since October 7th. And Hamas, it's unclear to me if it is official or not, but I've heard that Hamas accepted it. And it was also passed by the UN Security Council, 14-0. The Russians actually abstained, but they did not. They could have killed it. They didn't. And I think the reason they gave for it is that, well, it was just confusion over the provenance. Was this? They did not see evidence that the Israelis were supporting it, that it did come from Israel, but they didn't stop it. And Hamas apparently accepted it. But now you're hearing things, constantly. It seems like one thing seems to have happened in reality. There is a ceasefire proposal that's for real and is supposed to be a permanent ceasefire. It's cessation of hostilities that's carried out in stages. And that's something that Hamas has been demanding all along, is that, we can't have just a temporary ceasefire where we hand over all the hostages and then you kill the rest of us, right? That's, it has to be permanent. If we hand over the hostages, you also got to agree not to, you have to pull all your soldiers out and just end this conflict. And that's what this does in stages. So again, it really does go against the Netanyahu stated goals, which is to destroy Hamas, because if this ceasefire goes into effect, Hamas will still be there. And that's something that he said was unacceptable all along. And now, oddly, the way that, that the U.S. administration has been framing this as saying, okay, this is something that came from the Israelis and Hamas needs to accept it. And that does not seem to be what is going on. Now they're saying, well, there's rumors that Hamas doesn't, or maybe it was, one Hamas official did, but the actual Hamas leader, I forget his name, has not. I don't know. It's odd. So it seems to me, I apologize for being such a cynic when it comes to Israel, but I don't think that this is serious. That it's more show on the part of the Biden administration. It's because, for the various reasons we've given over these, previous episodes, Israel, the situation in Gaza has been a disaster, not just for Israel, but for the U.S. It has led to, increasing isolation of the U.S. and the world community. And they just are desperate to do something, to demonstrate that, they do really want to bring this conflict to an end. So I think, I'm thinking that they knew that Israel would shoot this down. They put it forward, it got UN Security Council approval, and that's a big plus for them because they've always been the one dissenting vote. This time they actually sponsored a bill that sailed through, right? But they knew that Israel was going to shoot it down, but they're going to try to frame it somehow as being Hamas's fault. And I think that's what we're seeing playing out right now. That's my cynical
I think that has to be it. Because, if you think about it, it just doesn't make any sense because if we think about just what we talked about on Monday, we talked about the U.S. And Israel supplying Israel with intelligence to carry out this hostage rescue. If you had a ceasefire proposal that included the exchange of all hostages on the table, that the U.S. was so confident about.
Right.
This is an Israeli peace proposal. And Hamas now says, okay, we accept this proposal. Maybe there's not 100% agreement, but there's clearly room to work there if Hamas says they want this deal. But it seems like there was never any deal on the table to begin with. Because then why would you carry out this huge operation in the middle of when you're purporting that, oh, there's a ceasefire deal that we're working on for exchange of hostages?
The hostages can be released without any cost in turn.
You ended up killing your own hostage, some of your own hostages, killed hundreds of civilians, destroyed more infrastructure. 270 plus people dead. When you said that there's a ceasefire deal and Hamas agreed to it, so clearly there isn't a deal, or why would you do this? You should. It looks a bad look, right?
When it comes down to the U.S., I'll only believe that there's been a real change in policy. If there is a real change in policy, I think we're going to see like just all bloody hell break out in the U.S. media, because Israel's groups, the AIPAC and the ADL and virtually every member of Congress and virtually every newspaper, they're going to be howling with rage if there really is a change, and the U.S. administration is clamping down on the Israelis and telling you enough is enough. You're not getting another bullet or another bomb from us. It's over, until you. But the fact that we're not seeing that just tells me that this is all show. I mean, if it becomes real, there'll be, you'll know there'll just be a lot of screaming and howling. There's a lot of screaming and howling even when these gestures are made, but it will be, a thousandfold. And then Israel, will be forced to stop because they cannot continue this war without U.S. support. But they're continuing it. There's no evidence of any serious let up, and the conflict and up in the northern end of Israel continues to heat up. We're still short of an all-out war, but there's a lot of missiles going back and forth across that border.
Yeah, I know I say this all the time, but it's just so crazy to me that America doesn't want this war. Biden doesn't want this Gaza war, but he doesn't do anything about it. It just shows, it's just proof that AIPAC, Israel is really in charge. Like, it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's like clearly he wants to do everything he can, but he can't because the influence and the power of the Israeli lobby is so great that he's going to torpedo. I mean, he's torpedoing his election either way. We talked about he is also a bit of a Zionist, but
he's more than a bit of a Zionist. He's a very serious Zionist. Yeah, but he also wants to be reelected. Yeah,
but he doesn't want this war. He doesn't want this war, and he can end it.
It's making things difficult for him, but he just cannot say no to Israel. I mean, that's just a fact. There's a chance he might do something if he does become reelected, that he might do something afterwards. There was some sort of leak, apparently. I think again it was that what's that organization that tapes these interviews? The guy goes in and posing as somebody, and then gets somebody to to admit what's going on behind the scenes.
Project Veritas.
Project Veritas, right? Yeah. There recently was a couple weeks ago. He said that's what he was told, that Biden can't do anything about it because of the huge, he used some word very similar to huge, the huge Jewish influence in American politics, and so therefore, we'll have to wait until after the election, and then he may change his then he plans to change his policy. So that may be in fact what he's thinking, and maybe it's not so much. Again, he's scared of the donors, but again, it is hurting the United States. They don't like it. And there's got to be a lot of screaming within the State Department. It's just like, we're losing our, these alliances that we built up. We've talked about it, Saudi Arabia.
Losing all of our friends.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's just our stock continues to plummet. It's just our global reputation has taken a real beating, and they can see it happen. They don't like it.
Yeah. Well, what percentage of Americans do you think are aware of the Israeli influence in our government?
I think it's a lot larger than it used to be.
That's what I'm saying. It's got to be this. AIPAC and them, they have to be freaking out because they've been able to do this sort of openly without any repercussions for a long time. And all of a sudden, it's becoming an issue since October 7th. And everyone's like, hey, wait a second. Why does Israel get to call the shots? Why does every congressman have an AIPAC guy?
Right.
Why do they call him? It's like Thomas Madison called him a babysitter, checking in on you all the time and seeing how you, what you're going to do. Why were there more votes in Congress in the last month on Israel than there were on America?
Yeah.
It's got to be, I don't know. I wonder. For me, it's just so clear now, but you realize that it takes a while for information to sort of percolate through society.
It certainly does.
Now. But also it just sort of percolates very asymmetrically. It just sort of goes through different channels, not the way that it traditionally used to be, where people would read the newspaper or watch CNN.
Right. Well, there used to be just a few major sources of news, right? Yeah, everybody would listen to Walter Cronkite, for example. When I was a kid, I remember Walter Cronkite, and it was just like what he had to say about the war, could sway large swaths of the population, could determine elections, because 50% of the people were watching them. But there's nobody who has that kind of media influence.
Right. There's no uniform worldview of like, oh, this is what Tennesseans believe or Americans believe. Now it makes it a little bit difficult, though, for, I think, a very kind of fractured society to operate, because now whenever I meet somebody, I don't know their positions on anything. And it's kind of weird. Now my conversation is incredibly limited because all of a sudden, you talk to somebody like, oh, well, yeah, now Trump's convicted. Thank goodness, go to jail. Like, all right, I have a different opinion on that whole situation. I'm not saying he's a good guy, but I can't even debate on this subject because everybody is processing different information through different sources. So my next door neighbor, you belong to digital online tribes, sort of, to your own echo chambers. And so you don't know, it makes it very difficult to kind of, I think, gauge sort of what a country is feeling and thinking. There's also just sort of a lot of internal suppression. I'm sure everybody that's listening to this, everybody knows that you censor yourself all the time, just because you don't want to offend people. And if you're like a normal person, you don't want to engage in confrontational dialogues all the time with people. You don't want confrontational conversations. So you kind of censor. So you just don't know where people stand on issues, and it's just a weird time. So I don't.
I know. It's just that, well, there are a lot of things that we talk about that would just be kind of like completely mind blowing to a lot of people because, if you forget about it. But a lot of people, including very intelligent people, very well-educated people, maybe even more often the well-educated people, are actually very thoroughly kind of immersed in these certain media cultures, where they've got one narrative, they're deeply plugged into that narrative, and they only occasionally hear about this other narrative that's being propagated by very bad people, and that behind it all is Vladimir Putin or something. And that's basic. And then you start talking, they realize, oh, that's the world that they inhabit. So they think I'm just a Putin stooge or something. I have to be really careful about what I say. It's a real challenge. I think I was just going to say, I mean, okay, I'll go real quick. I'll just say I had similar experience just kind of with my father-in-law, because I talk to you all the time, and we talk very freely on these subjects. And Peggy, my sister, your daughter's in Moscow, and so just I didn't even cross my mind that what I was saying was somehow controversial, or that somebody would view it as like as almost an evil, wrong thought idea, that like, oh, that my opinion on Russia or this whole Ukraine war. It's like, if you were bought into that mainstream narrative, MSNBC all the time, Putin is Hitler, Trump is Hitler, and that fuels so many people. And if you kind of go against that, it's just,
I don't want to do that. I want to have a good relationship with my father-in-law. So I just sort of avoid these things, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just,
right.
it's
Yeah,
just
no, it's a
weird.
real, yeah,
So,
no, we are living in a very polarized society, and part of it is because of the new media landscape. There's no question about it. It used to be that there was kind of a broad center. Um, um, it used to be that if you were going to succeed as a news channel or a broadcasting system, we had CBS, ABC, NBC, PBS. That was basically it for national news, national TV news. Um, well, you went for the center, right? If you had something, an opinion that was too extreme or whatever, you lost a lot of your audience. And so there was actually an incentive to try to keep things balanced and not to offend people too much. But now with this very fragmented, media landscape that we have, and with the internet and just a million different ways in which people can consume news, that that's fallen apart. And the way that you make a buck, or attract viewers, is you stake out a certain position and you stick, a certain narrative and you stick to it.
mm,
And then the people that, are like-minded people will enter that echo chamber and they don't leave it. That's what
mm.
happens now.
Yeah, well, the kind of discouraging thing that I've seen is that you would imagine that if somebody is listening to follow somebody and listens to them, and then what they say is just complete garbage, and it turns out to be completely false. It sold you
Right.
a bunch like you're like, oh, I can't trust that guy. Frank
Right.
keeps on
Well,
spouting
I had
bullshit
that
all the time.
experience. Like at the beginning of the Iraq War, I used to follow some mainstream, like conservative media, like National Review, and then I continued to follow it for a while after the war, and then it became clear to me that these people were utterly wrong, about the causes of the war. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and more than that, okay, everybody makes mistakes. They were not acknowledging their mistake. They were just sweeping it under the rug and going on to the next thing. And I say, well, forget it. I'm not, I'm looking for something else. Um, but a lot of people just kind of seamlessly transition. I think a perfect example is, Rachel Maddow, who was just, was constantly, rising to higher and higher heights of hysteria during Russiagate. And it was always right around the corner. It was encouraging all her viewers to believe that President Trump would be handcuffed and, let out of the White House. And then when the whole thing fell apart, well, there was a sharp drop in her viewership, but then she just went on, and then she started building up viewership
Yeah,
again.
no, that's what I'm saying. That's what's discouraging is that
Yeah,
you think that if someone's been proven to just be feeding you falsehoods over and over again and clearly controlling some type of narrative, which if you spend any time watching mainstream media, if you just take a step back and look over the past
right,
5 years and just think like, what did they get right? What did they get wrong? Their score report card's going to be an F. They were terrible with so many things,
right. Well, again, with
COVID and
Ukraine, everything.
Ukraine,
Right,
Russiagate.
right.
Right. You can
Yeah, I
go
mean, it
on
was
all
actually Russia
forever.
was about to collapse. This the summer offensive last year was going to be a great success, and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, they always kind of, they try to convince you, yeah, that it's succeeding, and then when it doesn't, they just kind of change the topic. They go to something else and change the subject.
Right. I mean, I think if you're just watching news occasionally every now and then, maybe you're not able to build up kind of the longer body of
Yeah,
work of falsehoods. But I think either people just have too short term of a memory, and I think the bigger thing is that people just they don't want to admit they were wrong, and they
uh-huh.
changing their mind is
Yeah.
just
Well, I
eating
think,
some
yeah,
humble
and it's
pie
kind
that
of
they don't want to eat.
right. I think also, yeah, it's just kind of, well, loyalty to the tribe or concern for reputation. You say, okay, yeah, it seems like they're being wrong, but you just kind of you follow the New York Times and you know what the respectable opinion is, and that is shift, and maybe it contradicts what it said 5 years earlier or whatever. But the main thing is to be with the respectable people, the smart people, so called, and
Mm.
that's. I'm afraid that that's a lot of what's going on here. I mean, if you're really devoted to the truth, you can stop and just start picking these things apart and saying, this isn't making sense. And it's, hey, just 2 months ago, you were predicting this and it's not happening. Um, but a lot of people don't think they can be very smart, but I think they're not very rigorous or, um, let's say, rigorous thinkers, and they're just not willing to put their reputations at risk. They don't want to. They painted for themselves this picture, where they're on this island of angels, and out there are the deplorables, and
Mhm.
they don't want to fall off the island and be among the deplorables. That's the main thing for them. It seems like it's scary. They've convinced themselves that out there is evil and ignorance. And okay, there may be some times where we don't get things quite right or whatever, but this is still the island of the angels, and I got to stay on it.
Well, let's see how long they will.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's
Yeah,
getting harder and harder. I mean, there's no question about it.
yeah. I mean, it just, I mean, this is one of the great things about the information space we have today with social media is that you can find people that will earn your trust on certain topics. Like sometimes I think I get worried. I'm like, am I becoming too much in my own echo chamber, and I'm becoming, emotionally pro Russia or pro Palestine? But then I take a step back and I just take a look, and I'm like, no, I'm not, because I'm following people like the Duran or Judging Freedom, where they're correct. That's the thing. Is like they called it. I listen to them. I
Right.
watch mainstream media. Mainstream media gets it wrong almost all the time, and the guys on the Duran
Yeah.
will nail it. They'll say,
Yeah.
like the counteroffensive Ukraine. They called it to a T, like everything, if you were
Yeah.
following them. And so
Right. Yeah.
that earns your trust, and you realize that there is a truth, and that
Yeah.
that I'm not. There's a certain aspects of being in an echo chamber.
Right.
What
I
for
think
everybody.
it's right. It's impossible to avoid it entirely, and
Mm,
I think it is important to occasionally step out or even regularly just kind of check in on the mainstream sources. For example, I get an email from the New York Times every day, and like, I think every other day from the Huffington Post, and I'll go through it. I'll see what they're saying. Partly I'm just curious. I want to know what the establishment narrative is. Um, but so I know what they're thinking. I think a lot of people, and I think that's generally true of people that in the, let's say, the dissident community. It's just that
mm.
we generally have a pretty good idea. I mean, there is a danger that you could just go too far down a rabbit hole or whatever, or you get too insulated. But we
We all
generally
have a
know
friend.
because of the nature of things, it's hard to not know what the mainstream media is saying because, it
Mm,
has all the really big platforms. And, um, but people that are in the mainstream media, I think sometimes they really don't know what the dissident point of view is, the alternative media. They occasionally have it described to them in very, distorted terms from their mainstream sources. And
mhm.
they, told that these people are bad, they're ignorant, or some combination of the two. And that's what they think, or or they're Russian agents. I mean, it's really silly, but they're still saying that kind of stuff, both in Western Europe and the U.S. Whenever things go wrong, it's the Russians are pulling the strings. It's really really silly stuff, but that's the kind of thing that people in the mainstream are told.
Yeah. I wonder what percentage of people that watch mainstream media like MSNBC are people like you and me that are watching it just to see like what they're saying, but we don't actually support it. So, it might be a sizable portion. The viewership for legacy media has gone down considerably. And
Right.
you're wondering, now are half the viewers just people trying to catch the legacy media and their lies and to post it on these other
Yeah.
platforms?
I
I'm
would
sure
guess
it's
that
a
it's. I guess it would be considerably less than half. I would think.
Yeah, I know,
Probably
but
it's.
maybe not an insignificant portion.
Yeah,
It could be
maybe
five
5 or ten
percent or
percent or
something.
something. Yeah, right.
Right, right. I think that I don't know, but I would like to think that there are more people in this country that view the world in a similar way that we do, but don't talk about it because they're afraid to speak about it publicly because they know it goes against the establishment and the narrative. So it's hard to gauge what a country is thinking or feeling these days. I mean, even
Yeah,
if you go back to when Trump won in 2016, I remember I was in China and Hillary was polling like 5 to 6% ahead of Trump, and it seemed
right.
like it was clear the betting odds were like 20 to 1 in favor
Right.
of Hillary, and I bet like 500 RMB with odds like 10 to 1, like uh $20 to win, like $500 or something like this, or $250, and with my buddy, and I was, the reason I did it is because I was like, even though we're doing these polls that show Hillary leading, I just know that there's so many people, even here in China, that I know that are afraid to say that they want Trump to win. That they
Right.
just that I could see that self censorship. So I'm just trying to say it's hard to understand what people believe and think in
Right.
today's society.
Yeah. Even with the opinion
Um,
polls, I think it's been shown. I mean, that's
right,
yeah. People they know what the respectable opinion is, and they know the one that's condemned, and that they realize that if they're in the latter category, sometimes they're reluctant to even reveal their opinions that even to a pollster over the phone. Um,
right. Yeah, I think I would. If somebody from the government calls me up and says, how do you feel about Russia? I'm like, oh, they're pretty, Putin, he's a thug. Don't take my money. I'm, stay away from me. But, okay, well, yeah, I wonder how much longer if it'll soon become kind of like what you said it happened in the Soviet Union, where everybody knew that the mainstream media or the state media was just a complete joke. Everybody was aware it's propaganda, and there was sort of a sort of a black market for information and real news. If
right.
we're kind
Yeah,
of almost at
we're
that
heading in
stage
that
now.
direction. I think there's still, and this is what I found, and it's something to my surprise. It's just actually it's the kind of the educated elite class that supports this mainstream media and continues to believe in it. It's that's the bubble that they live in, and they just don't. I don't think they understand the extent to which other people have lost faith in it, or when they talk
Well, I
about
feel
it,
like
for them it's just a problem of misinformation and conspiracy theories out there that must be shut down, and that's why we get all the moves towards censorship.
Hmm. Well, I wonder what percentage of the so-called elites are getting paid either directly or indirectly from the government. That's the problem. That's the elite class. Most of them are tied to the state in some way. Their livelihoods are tied to the state in some way.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think that's the
yeah. I
issue.
mean, a lot of them are, certainly, a certain number of them are directly employed by the government, but a lot of people um, are contractors, let's say, for the security and military establishment, or, um, well, even like the major securities and finance firms, like Goldman Sachs, whatever. They have very cozy relationships with the government, with the SEC, and so on and so forth. It's kind of all his one big club in a way.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe we can move over to back to the Middle East real quick. Have you heard any more updates about what's happening between Lebanon and Israel?
No, I'm afraid I haven't. So we're still where we are. Maybe this was
Have,
another false alarm. Or perhaps there was a real move towards war, but um, there was an intent, but the U.S. or factions within Israel put the brakes on it. Well,
did you
we
hear
don't
about
know.
the use of white phosphorus in Lebanon?
Um, just briefly, I don't have any information on that.
Okay, yeah, I was
Yeah,
wondering if that was a significant escalation because I've been seeing pictures of people that were burned by this white phosphorus,
yeah,
and this is chemical warfare. It's a
right.
war crime, but apparently
Well, I know
that's
that
just
Israel's used white phosphorus in the past in Gaza. I don't know if they used it during the current campaign, but they've used it in previous ones.
hmm, okay. Okay. Well, if there's anything else in the news that's on your mind, if not, we can maybe do a little shorter episode today.
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's really more of the same. I mean, there's certainly things that you can say about Ukraine, but nothing in particular, nothing that's any dramatic developments. It's just a continuation of the same trends. Um, eh, so yeah, we could cut it short today, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be good. It is my wife's birthday, so I know I need to spend time with
Yes.
her. Happy wife, happy life kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, okay, well then we'll end it here then. Okay,
Okay.
thanks a lot, Dad.